Hello, welcome to the first video on this series about an Irish Antarctic explorer, Tom Crean. In this video, I will be talking about his early life in Kery, joining the Royal Navy, a background history of the Antarctic explorations, a brief history of how Markham made the exploration happen to the Antarctic, and how Tom Crean joined the exploration to Antarctica. So, Tom Crean was born 20th July 1877 to Patrick Crean and Catherine Courtney, who were farmers outside the village of Anascol in the Dingle Peninsula, County Kerry. Patrick and Catherine had 10 children between the 1860s and 1870s, but life was hard when Tom was born. Why? In the late 1870s, a threat of another potato blight was looming, because the weather was miserable with the rain and grain prices collapsed. The fear of evictions and starvation reared its ugly head again, which hadn't been seen since the time of the Great Hunger. And Tom's parents were finding it tough to provide for not just himself and themselves, but also Tom's 5 brothers and 4 sisters. Tom went to a Catholic school near Anascol village, but the education was very basic, and probably like most kids at the time, he left school as quickly as possible, since it isn't abnormal at the time kids aged 12 to leave school, but some would continue on till 14. But in fairness, the education was only focused on learning to read and write. But there probably was pressure to help out on the family farm and bring in the money. 12 people is a lot of mouths to feed. But Tom probably had a hunger for adventure or to escape the miserable hardship of rural life, especially more so on the family farm. Anniscall had fairs in the village, and the biggest fairs were in May and October, and possibly at these fairs he heard stories from old men telling of adventures, and probably this was it, that he had enough and wanted to do more in his life, just like most of his brothers did. Several of his brothers immigrated from Kery, although according to a historian MacDonald, there seems to be a tradition of Anascor lads leaving to join the British Navy. But Tom's elder brother, Martin, found work across the Atlantic on the Canadian Pacific Railway. Michael drowned at sea with the ship he was on. Cornelius, who is 6 years older than Tom, joined the RIC, Royal Irish Constabulary, a police force, and was killed in an ambush by the West Cork Brigade (IRA) during the Anglo-Irish War, 1919 to 1921. Tom's sister Catherine married an RIC man, but Tom's 2 other brothers, Hugh and Daniel, remained on the farm, and when their father died, Hugh and Daniel agreed to split the family land in two, and they both stayed in the area for the rest of their lives. But until then, while growing up in the 1880s and 1890s, Tom's father Patrick could hardly make ends meet, and with 10 children, keeping parental guidance was difficult. So Tom had a strong streak of independence, and with this independence he eventually signed up to a recruitment station in Menard Inlet, just a few miles southwest of Annisgall, to join the British Navy in Queenstown, now Cove, County Cork, 10th July 1893, just shy of 10 days before his 16th birthday. The recruitment age starts at 16. So how did he manage to join the Royal British Navy? He lied about his age or forged his papers. Tom was boy second class, and his service number 174699. The first appointment was to the boys' training ship on the HMS Impenetrable in the Devonport, Plymouth, southwest of England, where he served for his naval apprenticeship. Wasn't long he found Navy life hard, strict discipline, unsympathetic harsh regime. But this life made him prepared for his later life as an Antarctic explorer. Tom survived the first examination and promotions came to him fairly quickly. Within a year, Tom was promoted to boy first class. Then later on, 28 November 1894, he was transferred to HMS Devastation, a Coast Guard vessel based in Devonport, and for the first time, the first class boy was at sea. Little information about Tom's early life in the Navy, but he did have promotions and demotions, and probably was homesick. Some reports apparently suggest Tom was disenchanted by the Navy routine. He tried to run away, and another suggests he wasn't with the rough living conditions on naval ships and poor food. He threatened to abscond. The regime was out of date by the time Tom joined the Navy. There is no denying the Royal Navy was the right arm of the British Empire, but in the late Victoria era it was complacent, out of date, because the Royal Navy still held in common to Nelson. But modernization would come by Admiral Sir John Fisher, which would come in time before the First World War. On Tom's 18th birthday in 1895, while serving on the flagship HMS Royal Arthur in the Pacific, Tom was promoted to ordinary seaman. But in less than a year, while serving HMS Royal Swan in the Pacific, Tom was promoted to able seaman. Then by 1898, eager for new skills, he was transferred to HMS Cambridge at Devonport for gunnery training. And 6 months before Christmas in 1898, he was moved to a torpedo school ship at Devonport under HMS Defiance. While at Chatham, major naval port, Tom advanced a little further by securing qualifications for various torpedo and gunnery duties. Tom also made a reputation of reliability and an impressive career record. The hierarchy in the naval service described Tom Crean as very good in his early naval service, even though he spat with authority didn't blemish his record too much between 1899 or 1900. But in the end of September 1899, he was promoted to petty officer second class while serving at Vivet in Devonport. Also in 1900, 15 February, petty officer second class Tom Crean was assigned to a torpedo vessel in Australian waters, the HMS Ringarooma. Is it Ringarooma or Ringarooma? If I have any Australians that subscribe or watch this, how is it pronounced? How is it pronounced? So for the meantime, I'm just going to say Ringarooma. So the brief history of Antarctic exploration. When did it start? The idea of it started with Magellan and Drake in the 16th century, followed by two 18th century French explorers who discovered a neighboring sub-Antarctic islands. But the first Antarctic exploration was by Captain James Cook in 17 January 1773, when he and his crew on his vessel Resolution and Adventure sailed 75 miles in the Antarctic Circle. And while Cook didn't see Antarctica, he didn't see the value of exploration. An Irishman from the county Cork, on the other hand, Edward Bransfield, recorded on 30th January 1820 of the first sighting of Antarctica. In January 1839, a sealing captain, John Biscoe, circumnavigated the continent. Until 1841, Sir James Clark Ross penetrated the pack ice which surrounds the continent with his two ships Erebus and Terror, which he named Antarctica's Mountains, which stands guard over the entrance, which many British expeditions frequent around Ross Island and in Ross Sea. An international expedition to Antarctica was led by a Belgian, Adrian, and took the ship Belgica between 1897 and 1899 to certain waters. And after arriving at Antarctica with much reluctance, Adrian and his crew became the first men to stay the winter in Antarctic. For 4 months in bitter cold and heavy winter darkness, two of the crew were declared insane and one died. The survivors, a Norwegian, Ronald Amundsen, aged 25, a polar explorer, would later complete the first ever navigation of the Northwest Passage across the frozen top of the Northern American continent, and he would reach the South Pole a month before his rival, Captain Scott. The other survivor, an American, Frederick Cook, until his dying day, says he was the first man to have reached the North Pole before Robert Peary. The first landing of the Antarctic continent outside the Antarctic Peninsula happened on the 24th of January 1895 by an 8-man expedition. The crew landed at Cape Adare, but there are disputes who set foot first. The Norwegian Garsden claimed it was himself who leaped out of the rowing boat to be the first man to place his feet in the Antarctic, and in 1899 Garsden secured to lead an 8-man expedition to purposely stay at the Antarctic again and erected 2 prefabricated tents. Now for the brief background of how the Antarctic exploration Tom Crean will be in got started. Sir Clements Markham, a Navy veteran, was on board Assistance in 1850-1851 to search the 1845 Northwest Passage expedition by Sir John Franklin, in which 129 lives were lost. Markham, later in his years, was the driving force for Britain's exploration in the Antarctic when there was so little interest, and his aim was to make sure Britain would demonstrate to the world its manhood. But he made sure that the expedition would be done the British way. No dogs were used to haul supplies. The men were to do it themselves. Also, Markham was sentimental towards dogs. So, when did this start? For Markham to get the ball rolling for the Antarctic expedition? 1885. And how long did it take until it finally took off? 16 years. The 1901 and 1904 British National Antarctic Expedition cost £90,000, equivalent to today £4,700,000. In euro, €5,443,368 €346 and 8 cents. And for any Americans from the States, it'd be $5,753,458 and 2 cents. Did the money come easily? Absolutely not. Markham had to do plenty of maneuvering to eventually get the money. And a new ship called Discovery, that was from Dundee, Scotland. So Markham planned every minuscule of this expedition, but he didn't go on it, except the future known Antarctic explorer Robert Falcon Scott was chosen by Markham to lead the expedition. Also, Scott was Markham's protege. Eventually, Discovery left London 31st July 1901 and arrived at the Isle of Wight August 5th for an event. But also, Edward VII and his wife Alexandria went on board the Discovery and gave the crew and Scott a royal farewell, and on the day after, Discovery sailed. Eventually, Discovery docked at Lighterton, New Zealand, 29th November 1901 for supplies until Christmas. And this is when Tom Crean became a crew member on the Discovery. Okay, so, 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 so. How Tom Crean actually came to be on the Discovery. Apparently reported in magazines, newspapers, and other books, a crew member called Charles Bonner, aged 23, apparently while drinking with his crewmates, climbed the mainmast beyond the crow's nest. Now, no one actually knows what happened, but basically, according to Scott, the sea swell was too much for Bonner, and he fell, holding a piece of the vane, and hit his head on the iron deckhouse, and died instantly. This is how Tom Crean apparently joined Discovery, but actually before Discovery arrived, HMS Ringarooma got word about using every man possible to help the explorers while stocking up on supplies in Lighterton, and Tom Crean was one of those men, helping the crew in Discovery before what happened to Charles Bonner. Then you know the rest in part 2. So that is it. I would say Slán, and as I said, I will see you in part 2.